record highs, U.S. companies reporting record profits. You would think that the world would be embracing our free market system. But protests are turning violent all over the world. In Germany, as anti-capitalism protesters target Europe's new central bank location. Some of them even dressed up as clowns. They were apprehending clowns. This is the free market is under attack right here at home. Black Lives Matter. Protesters staging train takeovers to tell capitalist commuters that the free market isn't helping them. To Swiss America Trading Chairman Craig Smith on why these protesters don't have much faith in the free market. Well, that's probably an understatement, but what are we to make of that here? Because they feel like they're odd men and women out.
Well, they're terribly misguided, Neil. I mean, if you look at the Blockupy in Europe, or whether it Black Lives Matter in America, and by the way, all lives matter. Being a former fetus myself, I'm adamantly pro-life for everybody. But I got to tell you that they're just misguided, Neil.
You know, that's a brilliant line. That you have many of it. Being a former fetus myself. But, I never heard that. That's
well,
very
it's
good.
true.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We rolled it. Here you are beating up on your guests. See how it is? Do you see you're guilty? Okay.
Yeah,
anyway,
right. You're absolutely right.
Anyway, getting back to what happened in Europe. Let's take that for example, Neil. The Blockupy. They're blockupying this new building, $1.4 billion. How many jobs did that create? How much capitalism caused lives to be better in Europe? But instead, they're not happy with it. Look, when people do these
but in this
protests,
case, they're bad-mouthing a bank or a central bank that parcels out the cash in a way that they feel is unfair to the middle-income and poor folks. What do you think of that?
But see, this is where I agree with your introduction, Neil. We shouldn't even be depending on central banks to move the economy one way or another. If central banks should set the rates and let the economy do their thing, think about what capitalism is, Neil, in its purest form. You take a human resource, a natural resource, steel and a human being, you put capital to it, you put science to it, you create a product. That creates wealth. Banks don't create wealth. They distribute wealth to create more wealth. And this is the thing that bothers me about all this discussion of capitalism's evil. Hey, would we prefer communism or fascism or socialism or feudalism?
I think those protesters would. I think those protesters would.
But they're wrong. Look, they can scream as loud as they want. This is no different than the 60s when the Weather Underground and all those clowns were out there blowing up buildings and trying to change the society. Capitalism works. If you go back to 1790, just before Ben Franklin died, he put a design on our first coin, which, by the way, I own one, that said, "Liberty, industry, and parent of science, excuse me." And around the edge, Neil, it said, "To be esteemed, be useful." What did he say? He said, America's the parent of science. We have industry, and on top of that, we have liberty. And when you add capital to that equation, Neil, you create the greatest country in the history of the world. And instead of turning the way that Europe is turning, we should block our thoughts towards Europe and go back to the free market capitalism that you started this segment with, that made us the greatest nation and still does in the history of this world.
There's a good quote from Ben Franklin. Of course, he forgot that right after he said that, he electrocuted himself flying a kite. But Craig Smith, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Good seeing you, Neil.
Meanwhile, I'm flying.